Welcome to Haunted Canada. On the morning of Wednesday, September 15th, 1971, 29-year-old Mary Ann Plett, one of Edmonton, Alberta's first female real estate agents, left her office on Whyte Avenue in Edmonton, Alberta, to show an acreage just outside the city in nearby Looma, Alberta, to a mysterious man known only as James Cooper. Mary Ann Plett was never seen alive again, and the mysterious James Cooper was never brought to justice for her murder. Hi everyone, my name is Nadine, host and creator of Haunted Canada. I wanted to thank everyone who has subscribed, downloaded, and left a positive comment and review about my new podcast. I truly do appreciate it. If you are enjoying this podcast, please take the time to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Share and follow us on Facebook and Instagram or through our website on hauntedcanada.com. This episode, number 3, did take a little longer to get out as I wanted to include a lot of extra information from my research. And, well, personally for me, we did have a loss in our family this past week, so I wanted to thank everyone for their patience and for their support. I truly do appreciate it. For episode 3, we're going to be talking about a cold case, an unsolved murder that happened right here in Edmonton, Alberta. Now, some of you listeners may be wondering, what actually is a cold case? Well, I like the description that is done by Crime Stoppers, which says that a cold case is an unsolved criminal investigation which remains open pending the discovery of new evidence. New information could emerge from a witness, new material evidence could pop up, and with technological advances, anything is possible 10, 20, and even 50 years later. Please be advised that this episode does contain graphic information and material of a sensitive nature that some listeners may find upsetting. Listener discretion is advised. Mary Ann Plett was a wife, mother of 2 young boys, and was one of Edmonton, Alberta's first female real estate agents. She was working for Graham Realty, that in the early 1970s had an office on trendy Whyte Avenue in the old Strathcona area of Edmonton, the capital city of Alberta. While her husband, Jake, was a University of Alberta sociology student. Mary Ann was described as a pleasant and happy go-getter who was excelling in the male-dominated real estate industry in the early 1970s. She had a knack for selling, and her friendly personality made her a top seller in the capital city of Edmonton. She was so successful that she had already won a trip to Hawaii for being a top sales agent and was quickly on her way to winning a second Hawaiian vacation. Mary Ann's genuine desire to help her clients was seen by many whether they wanted to buy or sell a property. So when Mary Ann was asked to sell an acreage in the small hamlet of Looma, Alberta, about 25 kilometers southeast of the city of Edmonton, for an older couple that she knew, well, Mary Ann was eager to sell the acreage, and she went at it with the same positive attitude and determination that she always did. But Mary Ann knew that the owners of the acreage were anxious to sell, as they wanted to buy a house in Edmonton. They needed the money from the sale of the land to make this happen, and Mary Ann was eager to get some interest in the land. So when Mary Ann started getting phone calls from a potential buyer by the name of James Cooper, she thought that her prayers may have been answered and that she might have a buyer for the land. However, from the outset, James Cooper was odd. He never left a phone number, and he always requested to meet last minute, wanting to view the acreage in Looma at very odd times. The client, James Cooper, was described as a large man in his 40s with a low, raspy voice. He told Mary Ann that he was from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and that he worked for a large American mud pumping company in the oil industry. And he was interested in buying land in the Looma area to house equipment. Yet after showing the acreage to James Cooper on 2 previous occasions, Mary Ann began to get a weird feeling and felt uneasy around him, telling her husband, Jake, that she didn't like Mr. Cooper. This dislike turned into annoyance for Mary Ann, as Cooper had kept her waiting for long periods of time for scheduled meetings and had arrived late to view the acreage on 2 previous appointments. Police who investigated this case in the 1970s believe that the man known as James Cooper kept Mary Ann waiting for a reason, perhaps so that he could watch Mary Ann to ensure that she came alone, whether it was to the acreage or to pick him up at the Bonnie Doon shopping mall. Mary Ann had even told coworkers at Graham Realty that she found Cooper strange, as he would often be mumbling and arguing with himself. The third and final meeting with Cooper happened on the morning of September 15th, 1971, when the mysterious James Cooper called Mary Ann at the Graham Realty office on Whyte Avenue around 10 a.m. and requested to view the acreage in Looma, Alberta, for the 3rd time, instructing Mary Ann to pick him up from the Bonnie Doon shopping mall at 11 a.m. Mary Ann was never seen alive again. Just a few days after Mary Ann Plett's disappearance, another female real estate agent in Edmonton received a mysterious phone call from a man who identified himself as Dave Cooper. He also had a deep, raspy voice and said that he was from the East. The man stated that he was staying in a hotel in downtown Edmonton and wanted to look at an acreage that evening. The real estate agent said that the man, Dave Cooper, was a real talker and was in a real hurry, very similar to the descriptions of James Cooper. But thankfully, the female real estate agent's schedule was booked that evening, and she never met with Dave Cooper. When the local police found out about this, they checked all downtown hotels in Edmonton, but there was no Dave Cooper or James Cooper registered in any of them. Let's just take a moment now to go back and to learn about Mary Ann and who she was. Mary Ann Plett was born Mary Annie Scherstenko on January 21st, 1942, and was the 5th child of Frida and Matteo Scherstenko, and the 4th girl in a row for the close-knit family that lived in Brossard, Alberta, a small town which is close to Two Hills, Alberta. This was a small town in rural Alberta, where the majority of the residents operated farms, and life revolved around family, farming, and church. Mary Annie never liked her name, and when the family changed their name to Sherstan, she began to go by Mary Ann, spelled A-N-N, no E. Jake Plett is even noted as saying that if he ever wanted to get her riled up, all he had to do was just call her Mary, as she didn't like to be called just Mary. It was always Mary Ann. As a young child, Mary Ann was described as an old soul and was very mature for her age. She was always helpful and respectful to her parents, and even taught Sunday school while still in high school, and was also the president of the church's youth group. She was studious, focused, and had dreams of becoming a nurse after high school. Jake Plett first met Mary Ann in front of her high school on May 11, 1960, after just completing his third year at Bible college, where he was working in the Two Hills area as a student minister for the summer. Jake was working part-time at Mary Ann's family farm, spending a lot of time at the farm, while also getting to know Mary Ann. Jake mentioned in his book, Valley of Shadows, that they talked about all topics and subjects that summer, and that their fondness and their love for each other grew stronger every day. After high school, Mary Ann enrolled at Jake's college, and they both knew that they were meant to be together. So on October 21st, 1961, they married in Mary Ann's family church in Two Hills, Alberta. Neither Jake nor Mary Ann could have known that they would only have 10 years together. The newlyweds moved around those first few years, living in Lac La Biche, Hilo, and Taber, Alberta, while working for the church and growing their family. They soon welcomed 2 sons, Nelson and Lyndon, and the Pletts settled in to family life. Then in 1967, the family decided to move to Edmonton, the capital city of Alberta, where they would have more opportunities. Yet, this is what Jake Plett described in his book, Valley of Shadows, as one of the crossroads, a long chain of events and numerous decisions that were made, when looked at in retrospect, take on the shape of a giant funnel leading to the fateful and fatal appointment that Mary Ann would have on September 15, 1971, that would lead to her murder. You see, Jake wanted to move to Calgary, but Mary Ann, well, she liked Edmonton better, and she had family there. So the Pletts arrived in Edmonton on July 1st, 1967. Jake had to do some upgrading and applied to the University of Alberta, and Mary Ann started working for the John Rudin Company, selling a set of books, earning about $100 per month. Mary Ann soon realized that after renting for a while that she wanted to own her own house, and she began looking at the for sale ads in the local Edmonton paper. And she and Jake would often go out and view houses. But the houses that they looked at, well, they weren't what they wanted, and they weren't the right fit for their family. But Mary Ann had faith, and she believed in the power of prayer, and she would pray for the right house for her family. Eventually, the right house came up for sale, and with Mary Ann's positive attitude and determination, she was the first person to view the house. She and Jake loved it, and they decided to purchase their very first home. A 3-bedroom, 2-story, half-duplex in the Glengarry neighborhood on the northeast side of the city of Edmonton in Alberta. And on May 1st, 1968, they moved in. With Jake in school, 2 young boys, and Mary selling books, money was tight, and the Pletts soon realized that they needed to improve their finances. They needed to bring more money in. And as usual, Mary Ann was up for the challenge. She was a go-getter, and she soon announced to Jake that she was going to be a real estate agent. Jake was surprised, but he knew that his wife could accomplish anything, as she was focused, determined, and would be successful at whatever she did. Mary Ann first worked for the Wilton Real Estate at their office in the Glengarry Shopping Center, just a few blocks from the family home. The manager of Wilton Real Estate said that they would train Mary Ann. And on March 1st, 1969, Mary Ann began her new career as a real estate agent. Not only was she good, she excelled at sales. By the end of the second week on the job, she had already completed her first 2 deals. And by the end of the first year, she was doing so good that Mary Ann had paid off some of the family's loans with the commissions that she had received from sales. The manager of Wilton Real Estate predicted a very successful career for Mary Ann. Yet, change would happen again for Mary Ann just a few months later that would put her on that fateful and fatal course that would lead to her murder. Wilton Real Estate closed their offices, and Mary Ann applied to work at Graham Realty. Initially, she was told no, because at that time, in the late 1960s, well, they just didn't hire a lot of women. But they quickly changed their minds as times were changing. And by August of 1969, Mary Ann was leading the path for sales in the city of Edmonton for Graham Realty. By May of 1970, Mary Ann was 9th in the top 20 multiple listings for agents in Edmonton. And by the end of the year, she had won a trip for 2 to Hawaii. Unfortunately, she and Jake were not able to take the trip, so instead, she accepted the other prize, a $900 color TV. The family of 4 did take a trip to Disneyland that very year in May of 1971. By August of 1971, Mary Ann was in the top 20 of the real estate agents in Edmonton. And by September 15th, Mary Ann was only a few sales away from winning yet another trip to Hawaii, a trip that the family had planned on taking. Many people listening to this podcast may wonder, what made Mary Ann so good at her job? What made her such a successful real estate sales agent? Well, it was her dynamic personality, her honesty in business, and the care and compassion that she would always show towards clients. Mary Ann always treated everyone as a friend, and this was reflected in her business, as the majority of her referrals came from satisfied homeowners. Mary Ann was also very proud of her family, her husband, her 2 young boys, and the life that they were creating together. Always wanting to ensure that her house looked good, and with the financial success of her real estate career, she looked towards redecorating the family home, which involved buying some new drapes for the kitchen. Another crossroads that would lead to her fatal meeting with a man known only as James Cooper. Since Mary Ann needed material for the new drapes, there were only 2 choices of local stores in Edmonton, Alberta that had what she wanted: the House of Decor or Woodward's department store at the Northgate Mall. While everything was the same at both stores, from price, stock, and material, Mary Ann's choice to shop and purchase from the Woodward's department store proved to be a fateful and fatal choice. When the material for the drapes that Mary Ann had ordered from Woodward's arrived several weeks later, unfortunately, it was missing 1 panel. And when Mary Ann went to discuss the issue with the manager of the Woodward's department store, she soon found herself with a new client. The drapery manager, Mr. Nelson. He had an acreage in Looma, Alberta, that he and his wife wanted to sell, as they had decided to buy a house in Edmonton. With Mary Ann's dynamic personality and her drive to succeed, she quickly helped the Nelsons find their perfect home in the Edmonton area, which they purchased on July 27, 1971, arranging temporary financing until they sold the acreage in Looma, Alberta. Jake recounted in his book, Valley of Shadows, that this put extra pressure on Mary Ann to sell the acreage. But as usual, Mary Ann was determined, and she had faith. So on August 19, 1971, Mary Ann listed the acreage in Looma, Alberta for sale, advertising it regularly in the local newspaper. The ad would often say, "Land for sale, just 19 miles from Bonnie Doon." There were a lot of phone calls from people inquiring about the land in Looma, Alberta, but only one of those inquiries seemed to be a genuine potential buyer, a man by the name of James Cooper. James Cooper told Mary Ann that he was from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and that he worked for a large American mud pumping company, and that he was in town looking for an acreage to build a large shed to store pumping equipment. But Mary Ann would tell her coworkers that James Cooper would always say that he was in a hurry, or he would say that, "I just flew in from Winnipeg on business, and I only have a few hours. Can we go see a property now?" Jake Plett stated in his book that the first time that Mary Ann showed James Cooper the acreage in Looma, Alberta, was on Monday, August 23, 1971. Mary Ann had actually told her manager at Graham Realty, Norm, that she was a little concerned about being on the acreage with James Cooper, and that she had actually just let him walk around the acreage alone. Clearly, Mary Ann had a sense, a feeling that something was off about this man. She even told her coworkers that the client, James Cooper, was always well-dressed in a business suit, very talkative, friendly, joked and laughed a lot, and that he would often make fun of the Edmonton Eskimos, the city's football team in the 1970s, which is now known as the Edmonton Elks. Mary Ann said that her client, James Cooper, would talk at length on any subject and wanted to know the exact dimensions of the acreage. Mary Ann showed the acreage to Cooper again for the second time just a few weeks later on Thursday, September 9th, 1971. Initially, Cooper had wanted to see the property the night before at 6 p.m., but Jake Plett had told his wife, Mary Ann, that it would be dark then and suggested going earlier. So instead, Mary Ann picked up James Cooper at 6:30 a.m. at the Bonnie Doon shopping mall. It seems that the ever-elusive James Cooper now wanted to know the exact dimensions of the land. So Mary Ann said that she would go back and measure the site, which she did with a coworker later that same day. James Cooper told Mary Ann that if the acreage was big enough, then he would make her an offer the next time he was in town. This thought of being able to sell the land for the Nelsons is exactly what Mary Ann had been working so hard towards and had been praying for, as she knew that the Nelsons were now in a tight predicament, as Mrs. Nelson was not well, and they needed the acreage sold. Mary Ann felt deeply for her clients, her friends, and with even more drive and focus, she was determined to sell the Looma acreage. On the day that Mary Ann Plett disappeared, Wednesday, September 15th, 1971, just 6 days after she had shown Cooper the Looma acreage for the second time, that Wednesday morning began like all other days in the Plett household. Jake and Mary Ann had breakfast together with their 2 young sons, as they had done every morning. Jake wrote in his book, Valley of Shadows, that as he was getting dressed to go to university for his classes that fateful morning, he noticed that a button was missing from his dress shirt. Mary Ann, being the thoughtful and caring wife that she was, insisted on fixing it right there and then for Jake. As usual, she kissed her 2 sons that morning, and Mary Ann and Jake said goodbye in their normal manner, embracing and kissing affectionately, as Mary Ann would then stand in the front living room window and wave goodbye to her husband as he drove away. Neither Jake nor Mary Ann could have known that that would be the last time that they would ever see each other. Jake wrote in his book that Mary Ann spoke of the acreage that very morning at the breakfast table during her morning devotion. She spoke of her hope that Cooper would call that week to make an offer on the acreage, as she knew that the owners of the land, the Nelsons, really needed it sold. Nobody could have known that the phone call from Cooper would come sooner than Mary Ann had expected. James Cooper called the real estate office that very morning around 10 a.m. and requested to view the acreage in Looma, Alberta, for the 3rd time. Cooper directed Mary Ann to pick him up at 11 a.m. at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Mall in Edmonton, Alberta, which is only about a 5 to 8 minute drive from Mary Ann's office on Whyte Avenue. When Mary Ann left for that appointment with James Cooper, she was never seen alive again. Jake returned home from university that morning after his scheduled classes and fell into his usual routine of making lunch for the kids and studying. Jake would often listen for the familiar sounds of Mary Ann returning home in the early afternoon. The sound of her car pulling into the driveway, the distinctive sound of her walking up the driveway and walkway, unpacking her briefcase in the kitchen, and greeting Jake by always saying, "Hello, you. What you doing?" But none of those sounds came that afternoon. No phone calls from Mary Ann to check in, as she had usually done. That afternoon was eerily quiet. Jake noted in his book that around 4 p.m., someone at the real estate office had asked around the office if Mary Ann was back yet. And when everyone in the office realized that she wasn't, they all had a bad feeling. By 4 p.m., the office manager at Graham Realty, Norm, he called the Plett house and asked Jake if he could speak to Mary Ann, just assuming that she had gone home after showing the Looma acreage. Yet Jake told the office manager, Norm, that she wasn't home and that this was out of character for Mary Ann. Jake went to the real estate office on Whyte Avenue in Edmonton, and he and the manager, Norm, drove out to the Looma acreage, hoping to find Mary Ann. Maybe her car had broken down, or maybe she had run out of gas. Was she hurt? Was she injured? All thoughts that I'm sure must have been running through their minds. When Jake and Norm arrived at the acreage, the sun was just setting, and the darkness was descending upon them. The rain was falling, and all they could see at the acreage were trees, brush, waist-high grass, and the yellow and green Graham Realty sign. They looked all over the acreage, yet there was no sign of Mary Ann or her car. They both knew that something was horribly wrong. Jake and Norm checked at 2 houses that were close by. Jake said in his book that at one of the houses, the owners said that they had been in town all day and had just gotten home. But at the other house, the residents had been home all day. The wife was working in her kitchen, which overlooked the for sale Looma acreage, and the husband was working in the field. But neither of them had seen anything nor anyone on the for sale acreage that entire day. The police were notified, and a search party from the Sherwood Park Fire Department spent the evening searching the acreage with flashlights and a loudspeaker. Jake was involved in the search that evening, walking through the wet and muddy acreage, calling out Mary Ann's name in the darkness. The search party then fanned out, driving in different directions to check back roads and gas stations. They went towards the areas of Leduc, Camrose, and New Sarepta, all small towns on the outskirts of Edmonton. They called local hospitals, and one of the search parties even went to the Edmonton International Airport to see if Mary Ann's car was parked there or if there were any unusual incidences at the ticket counters. But the answer was always no. No one had seen Mary Ann, her car, or anything unusual. When everyone was done searching, they all agreed to return to the Whyte Avenue office of Graham Realty. A little later in the evening, around 11 p.m., Jake Plett was looking out the window of the real estate office on Whyte Avenue when he spotted Mary Ann's car, the 2-tone green Pontiac Laurentian, slowly driving by the Graham real estate office on Whyte Avenue with a man in the driver's seat. A man that Jake didn't recognize. Jake quickly shouted out to everyone in the office saying that it was Mary Ann's car. But by the time they all got into their own vehicles to give chase, Mary Ann's car had vanished. Police were immediately notified and told to keep a lookout for Mary Ann's car. And just a few hours later, the next morning before sunrise, a search was launched, which at the time was the largest search in Alberta's history. The acreage in Looma was searched meter by meter. A large pond on the property was drained, and every part of its murky bottom was explored. Yet still, there was no sign of Mary Ann. 2 days later, on Friday, September 17th, Mary Ann's vehicle, a 1970 Pontiac Laurentian, was found just 2 blocks from the Graham real estate office on Whyte Avenue, on the Don Wheaton Chev Oles parking lot, amongst the for sale vehicles. The very area where Jake Plett had seen his wife's car being driven by an unknown male the evening she disappeared. When the police checked the car, they discovered evidence indicating that it had been driven off-road. Mary Ann's blood and her wig were found in the trunk, and her purse and the contents of the glove compartment were missing. In the car, the police found clip-on sunglasses and a pack of Du Maurier cigarettes that did not belong to Mary Ann, Jake, or anyone in the Plett family. It was also evident that Mary Ann's vehicle had been driven roughly and off-road. It was reported in the Edmonton Journal that the green Pontiac was very dusty and had sustained damage to the front end bumper with a small gouge in the rear tire. Grass stalks were lodged in the front bumper, as well as a 2-foot-long tree was wedged in the undercarriage. When the police checked the radio of Mary Ann's car, they noticed that it was tuned into CJCA. However, Jake Plett said that his wife did not listen to that station, and the wipers were left on. The day that Mary Ann disappeared, it was raining. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sighting of Mary Ann. The family were desperate to get any information from the public who might have seen something on the day that Mary Ann disappeared, but not know of its importance. Yet, it was 1971, and there was no internet or Facebook yet. So, they did a mail-out campaign. With the help, support, and donations from local businesses, groups, and individuals, they were able to create and mail out 20,000 letters to rural addresses just outside the city of Edmonton. This mail-out letter was your modern-day missing persons poster. It contained all the information around Mary Ann Plett's disappearance: what she was driving and wearing, descriptions of her vehicle, the acreage that she was showing, and the vague description of the man known only as James Cooper. The letter also had more information that the car had been driven over country roads, grassy, and bushy areas. 4 days later, on Halloween, Sunday, October 31st, 1971, a break came in the case when a hunter discovered Mary Ann Plett's briefcase on a backwoods lumber road, Goose Lake Road, otherwise known as Lone Pine, in the Fort Assiniboine area, about 150 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. A 2-hour drive from Mary Ann's real estate office on Whyte Avenue in Edmonton, Alberta. An intensive search was launched with police dogs along a 15-kilometer stretch of heavily wooded area of trees that was covered with dense underbrush. The dogs unearthed a cache of papers, a can opener, a curler, all hidden under logs about 4 kilometers north of where Mary Ann's briefcase was found. The papers included listing books from Graham Realty and documents relating to the properties that Mary Ann had been working on. But just as the search was intensifying with the new discoveries, it had to be called off because on November 4th, more than 10 centimeters, about 4 inches, of snow fell, covering the Fort Assiniboine area. A $5,000 reward was offered for information leading to Mary Ann Plett's return. Graham Realty offered $1,500, $2,500 was offered by Edmonton Real Estate Board, and the Plett family offered $1,000. Jake withdrew from his sociology program at the University of Alberta to focus on his 2 young boys and to return to working in the home building industry to support his family. The winter brought about no new clues in Mary Ann's disappearance. But on Monday, April 17th, 1972, as the warmer temperatures of spring began to melt the winter snow, 2 employees of the Pinto Creek sawmill found women's clothing scattered along Goose Lake Road, also known as Lone Pine, in the Fort Assiniboine area. The RCMP said that discovering the clothes was a 1 in a million chance. It was in the same area where Mary Ann's briefcase and her other items were discovered just 6 months earlier. The police began another search, and this time they brought in a tracking dog. Within minutes of the tracking dog being released in the wooded area, they made a gruesome discovery. They had found a watch that had been given to Mary Ann by her mother as a high school graduation gift, along with the top portion of a human skull, a femur, and several smaller bones. The remains were positively identified through dental records as Mary Ann Plett's. In the weeks leading up to Mary Ann's murder, she had been paying off some of the family's debts. She paid off a bank loan that was used to buy her car, and she paid off some smaller amounts owed to family members. Mary Ann also wanted to thank her mom for babysitting the kids, so Mary Ann bought her mother a beautiful hat, and she gave her mother that hat on September 13th, 1971, just 2 days before she was murdered, telling her mom that it feels so good to have all of our debts paid off. The first time that Mary Ann's mother wore that hat was to Mary Ann's funeral. While discovering Mary Ann Plett's remains brought some kind of closure to her family, who could now hold a funeral and a memorial service, the killer, known only as James Cooper, has never been identified or held accountable for the murder of Mary Ann Plett, mother, wife, and one of Edmonton, Alberta's first female real estate agents. So who is James Cooper? This is what we know about him, and these are the important facts. Cooper was in Edmonton on Monday, August 23rd, 1971, as this was the first time that Mary Ann showed him the Looma acreage. Cooper was again in Edmonton on Thursday, September 9th, 1971, as this was the second time that he saw the acreage, and Mary Ann picked him up at 6:30 a.m. at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Mall in Edmonton. Cooper was in Edmonton again on September 15th, 1971, the day that Mary Ann disappeared, and Mary Ann again picked him up at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Mall at 11 a.m. He would have been away that entire day from 11 a.m. till well after 11 p.m. at night. James Cooper was described as a man in his 40s with a raspy voice. He said that he was from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and was in town looking for land for a pumping company, an American mud pumping company that he worked for. One of the original investigators believed that the killer was an Edmontonian, since he requested to be picked up at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Mall, which led police to believe that he lived in that area, making that his comfort zone. The murderer, James Cooper, might also have been from or have knowledge of the Fort Assiniboine area where Mary Ann's body was discovered. The bush in that area was extremely dense, and since it is in such a remote area, it suggested to the investigators at the time that the murderer was familiar with and had a knowledge of the area. The original investigator, Detective Growler, said in an Edmonton Journal article from 1992 that he doesn't think Mary Ann's car was used to drive on the muddy logging road in Fort Assiniboine where her remains were found, stating that her tires were bald and that there was no way that I could see her car being driven on that logging road, and that one of the RCMP cruisers tore off a gas tank while driving on that very logging road. Growler speculated that the murderer transferred Mary Ann Plett's body into a different vehicle for the drive up to Fort Assiniboine, about a 2-hour drive, and then returned to Edmonton to hide Mary Ann's car. The windshield wipers of Mary Ann's car were left on when the car was found, indicating that it had been raining the last time the car was used. The night that Jake saw Mary Ann's car being driven on Whyte Avenue, it was raining. The car radio was set to CJCA, a station that Mary Ann did not listen to. In the car, the police found clip-on sunglasses and a pack of Du Maurier cigarettes that did not belong to Mary Ann, Jake, or anyone in the Plett family. Mary Ann's vehicle was parked at the Don Wheaton Chev Oles car park lot on Whyte Avenue, again suggesting a knowledge and a familiarity with the Old Strathcona and Bonnie Doon area, Cooper's comfort zone. Items of Mary Ann Plett that are still missing, as noted in Jake Pelt's book, The Valley of Shadows, are her shoes, glasses, a tan-tooled leather purse with Mary Ann Plett's identification, 2 pairs of sunglasses in a brown leather case, and a complete set of keys on a brown handmade case. I can't imagine what this family must have gone through during this difficult time, but from my research and from reading the book Valley of Shadows, Jake Plett and his family showed such grace and compassion during Mary Ann's disappearance, and again once she was found and laid to rest. Jake Plett channeled his pain and grief into something positive by writing the book Valley of Shadows, that ended up being a bestseller, resulting in Jake being asked to speak at events across Canada. Jake was a deeply religious man, and he had faith. And it was that faith that helped him through the difficult loss and the murder of his wife, partner, and mother of his 2 young boys. And for that, I have great admiration for the man and the entire family. As of this podcast, the killer, known only as James Cooper, still remains at large. If you have any information about the murder of Mary Ann Plett or the identity of the killer known only as James Cooper, please call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. That's 1-800-222-TIPS. Or you can call the Edmonton Police Service at 780-423-4567. Thank you to everyone for listening to Haunted Canada. If you have enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe to the podcast, like, share, and tell a friend about it. Also, please take the time to write a positive review and leave a 5-star review as well, as that helps others find us on iTunes, Spotify, and all those other sites as well. So please leave a review, as it does help. If you have your own ghost story, true crime, or cold case, or something that you'd like for us to cover on Haunted Canada, please visit us and email us through our website at hauntedcanada.com, where you can also link and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're ever in Edmonton, Alberta, and you'd like to go on one of my award-winning ghost tours, please check us out at edmontonghosttours.com. Again, I just wanted to say a big thank you to every single person that has been downloading and sending positive messages and reviews about the podcast. I truly do appreciate it. Stay tuned, because I'm working on the next episode as we speak. Thank you again, and everyone, stay safe.